Hollywood did not turn on Montgomery Clift because he lost talent. It turned when the image became harder to sell. He had been sold as the beautiful new leading man, intense, sensitive, and controlled enough to make pain look noble. But the private cost was heavier than the public image allowed. After the car crash changed his face, the industry began speaking about him as damaged instead of surviving. He kept acting. He was still gifted. But the myth no longer knew what to do with the man. Why was a living actor worth less than the face audiences remembered? This is Hollywood Dark Secrets, where we look past the legend of a broken star and ask why Montgomery Clift's survival became the one story Hollywood could not sell. Before Hollywood tried to make Montgomery Clift into a leading man, his life had already taught him how to perform. He was not raised like an ordinary American boy running freely through neighborhood streets. His childhood moved through tutors, travel, lessons, manners, and the pressure of being shaped into something refined. Later accounts often describe his mother, Sonny Clift, as raising her children with a strong sense that they belonged to a more refined social world. That belief shaped the house. It shaped the schedule. It shaped the way her children were taught to speak, stand, and present themselves. Clift learned early that the body could be corrected, the voice could be trained, and emotion could be hidden until it was useful. That mattered later. On screen, people would call his silence natural. They would call his hesitation modern. They would say he brought a new kind of truth to Hollywood acting. But that truth came from pressure. Long before he belonged to film audiences, he belonged to rooms where control was expected. The stage became his first escape, but not a soft one. He was acting professionally as a teenager, and Broadway taught him discipline before Hollywood ever touched him. The stage did not reward laziness. It demanded timing, focus, repetition, and the ability to carry private emotion without letting it spill everywhere. Clift learned how to hold back. He learned how to make stillness interesting. He learned that a look could say more than a speech if the camera or the audience believed there was something trapped behind it. That became his weapon. When he reached Hollywood, he did not move like the older leading men. He did not have the blunt certainty of John Wayne. He did not have the polished ease of a studio-made romantic hero. In Red River, standing opposite Wayne, Clift looked young, watchful, and tense in a way audiences were not used to seeing in a male star. He did not try to overpower the frame. He made the frame lean toward him. He made hesitation feel dangerous. He made sensitivity look masculine without turning it into weakness. Clift's early film image was built from contradiction. He was beautiful, but not decorative. He was intense, but not loud. He seemed wounded before the audience knew why. In The Heiress, A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and later in his other major roles, he brought a kind of male vulnerability that did not ask permission. He looked like someone holding a private argument inside his own body. Audiences felt it. Critics respected it. The industry saw that his difference could be sold. But value is not the same as freedom. The studio system could tolerate his sensitivity as long as it could still be packaged as desire. He could be different, but not too different. He could be wounded, but still attractive. He could be nervous, but still readable as a leading man. He could make pain noble, but the pain had to remain controlled. That was the first trap. Hollywood wanted his fracture, but only if it stayed beautiful. Clift did not fit easily into the public script. He kept his distance from Hollywood society. He did not seem hungry for the usual displays of fame. He was known for living outside the expected star routine, for keeping close to New York, for resisting the full machinery of studio grooming. That resistance made him more interesting. It also made him harder for the fan magazines to explain. A star who does not behave like a star creates a problem. The press has to fill the empty space. The Hollywood leading man was supposed to come with a simple public story. He was handsome. He wanted women. Women wanted him. He might be troubled, but never unreadable. He might be sensitive, but never outside the accepted frame of masculinity. Clift complicated that frame from the beginning. His romantic life did not give the press an easy answer. He had important relationships with women. He had deep friendships with women. He was tied in gossip to actresses and social figures. He also had private attachments that the public world of the 1940s and 1950s was not prepared to discuss honestly. Later, biographers and writers would describe his sexuality in ways the old studio press never could. But during his lifetime, the public story remained careful, vague, and full of coded silence. That silence was not harmless. In that era, a star's private life could become a professional threat. A male performer who did not fit the clean romantic formula had to manage every public gesture. Who he arrived with, who he left with, who stood beside him at a premiere. What a gossip columnist could imply without saying directly. What a studio could ignore as long as no one forced it into print. Clift was not Rock Hudson, whose image would later become a different kind of Hollywood mask. He was not built as a cheerful, broad-shouldered fantasy husband. Clift's danger was more subtle. He seemed too inward, too self-contained, too hard to place. The press could not stop looking for a romance that would explain him. Fan magazines tried to turn stills, friendships, and public appearances into proof of a conventional love life. But the more they tried to make him simple, the more complicated he looked. That is where the image machine tightened. Hollywood did not need to announce a formal cover-up for the pressure to work. The pressure lived in the atmosphere. It lived in the careful public dates. It lived in the questions no one answered directly. It lived in the way a young actor learned that being desired by audiences was useful, but being fully known could be dangerous. Clift's friendship with Elizabeth Taylor became one of the most important relationships of his life. The screen made them look like a romantic dream in a place in the sun. Off-screen, the bond was deeper and more complicated than standard publicity could explain. Taylor understood something about him that the industry often did not. She saw the talent. She saw the pain. She also saw the person under the image. That mattered because in Hollywood, being seen as a person was not guaranteed. Clift's refusal to become a standard studio product helped make him great. It also left him exposed. He was not protected by a simple brand. He was not easy to stabilize. He was not a man the publicity department could lock into one neat sentence. He was beautiful, but tense, desirable, but distant, famous, but allergic to the machinery of fame, sensitive but trapped in an industry that still wanted men to be clean, hard, and easy to sell. The public called that mystery. The industry called it a problem waiting to happen. By the early 1950s, Montgomery Clift had become one of the most respected young actors in American film. His face carried the kind of beauty studios could sell without effort. But his real power was not just the face. It was the discomfort behind it. In A Place in the Sun, he did not play ambition as simple greed. He played it like hunger mixed with shame. In From Here to Eternity, he made stubbornness feel like a private moral code. He could stand still and make the audience feel pressure building under his skin. That was why the camera loved him. It did not need him to explain everything. It waited for the smallest shift, a jaw tightening, eyes lowering, breath catching. Clift's acting made male feeling visible without turning it into a speech. He helped push American screen acting away from polished display and towards something more exposed. But the industry's hunger for him came with a demand. The face had to remain usable. The body had to remain desirable. The suffering had to stay cinematic. There is a huge difference between pain that looks good under lighting and pain that makes production difficult. Hollywood loved the first. It had no patience for the second. That is the center of this story. The crash did not create Montgomery Clift's pressure. It revealed the limits of what Hollywood could tolerate. Before the accident, Clift could still be sold as the beautiful outsider. He could be described as intense, private, difficult, brilliant, and magnetic. Those words did not hurt the product. They made him more interesting. But there was a line. Once pain stopped being elegant, once it changed the face, once it slowed the work, once it made the body hard to insure, the language changed. The same traits that once made Clift fascinating could be renamed as liability. Private became unstable. Sensitive became difficult. Wounded became damaged. The industry did not need to say those words all at once. The shift happened in tone, in offers, in delays, in insurance questions, in the silence of phones that stopped ringing. Raintree County brought him back into Elizabeth Taylor's orbit. It was supposed to be a major production, a large romantic drama with money, prestige, and the kind of old-fashioned scale Hollywood still believed in. For Clift, it also meant working again with Taylor, someone whose loyalty to him would later matter more than any studio contract. Then came the night that split his image into before and after. On May 12, 1956, Clift left a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home while Raintree County was still in production. The drive should have been short. It became the hinge point of his public life. His car went off the road and struck a telephone pole. In the clean summary, that is the fact. A car, a road, a pole, a man nearly lost. But Hollywood history does not remember it cleanly. It remembers the panic. It remembers Kevin McCarthy driving ahead, realizing something had happened, and rushing back. It remembers Elizabeth Taylor running to the wreck. It remembers the later story that she helped clear broken teeth from Clift's mouth when he was struggling to breathe. Different accounts carry the details in different ways, and the script should be careful with that. But the center remains. Taylor was there, and her loyalty became part of the legend because it cut through the coldness of the industry around them. Clift's injuries were severe. His jaw was fractured. His nose was injured. His face required surgery and recovery. He survived, but survival did not mean return. Not in Hollywood. Not when a man's face had been part of the business plan. The industry could deal with a star who had a private problem if the public product remained intact. But Clift's private damage became visible. It sat on the face. It changed the close-up. It changed the conversation. That is why the accident became more than an accident. It became a new lens through which everything about him was judged. From that point forward, People did not just watch Montgomery Clift act. They looked for the crash. They looked for the difference. They looked for the line between the old face and the new one. Months of recovery followed, surgery, physical strain, pain. A body trying to heal under the pressure of a stalled production. Raintree County had to be finished. Clift returned to work. That fact alone should make the story less simple. He did not vanish immediately. He did not stop being an actor. He came back to the set and continued. But the return carried a cost. The studio still needed him to be a romantic lead. The camera still needed the close-up. The poster still needed the old promise. But the man standing under the lights was no longer untouched. His face had changed. His body had changed. His ability to work long scenes had changed. The pain was not symbolic. It was physical. It was in the jaw, the nerves, the muscles, the fatigue, the medication, and the effort it took to keep performing. That is the point audiences often miss. The crash did not erase his talent. It forced his talent to work through a damaged body. When Raintree County reached the public, the story around the film was no longer only about the film. Audiences knew about the accident. They knew Clift had been away. They knew his face had changed. That knowledge changed how they watched. Some people came to see the drama. Others came with a colder curiosity. They wanted to compare. They wanted to identify which scenes had been shot before the crash and which had been shot after. That is the moment Montgomery Clift became trapped inside the before and after myth. It is one thing for a star to age. It is another thing for the public to turn the change into a game. Every close-up became evidence. Every movement of the mouth became something to inspect. Every sign of strain became part of a public diagnosis. The man was still acting, but the audience had been trained to scan him. Hollywood did not invent all that curiosity, but it benefited from it. A damaged star can still sell if the damage becomes part of the story. The public says it wants perfection, but it also buys tickets to witness the failure of perfection. That contradiction followed Clift for the rest of his career. His post-crash face was not the grotesque ruin some later myths suggest. That is important. The more accurate truth is colder. He still looked like Montgomery Clift, but not the same Montgomery Clift the audience remembered. He looked older. He looked tighter. He looked as if the effort of being seen had become heavier. The change was enough for people to keep talking. And once the conversation became, what happened to his face, it became harder for the work to stand alone. Clift kept working. That matters. He did not become a simple cautionary tale overnight. He continued to deliver performances that carried intelligence and force. The Young Lions, Suddenly, Last Summer, The Misfits, Judgment at Nuremberg. The work did not stop. But the frame around him changed. His acting was increasingly read through the body that carried it, and the body was fighting him. Pain became part of daily life. Medication and alcohol entered the story, not as cheap scandal, but as tools he used badly and dangerously to keep moving. That does not excuse every breakdown. It does not turn the decline into someone else's fault entirely, but it makes the story more honest. The public saw dependency. The industry saw risk. What often got lost was the physical pain underneath it. The fantasy had required him to remain desirable. The reality was that he was trying to function. Hollywood could protect certain profitable men when their damage could still be folded back into the image. It can protect a temper if the star is profitable. It can protect a bad reputation if the box office is strong enough. It can reframe private damage as masculine intensity. But Clift presented a harder problem. His damage did not strengthen the old male fantasy. It exposed the weakness inside it. He was not the hard-drinking hero whose roughness could be sold as confidence. He was not the swaggering rebel whose trouble made him look larger. His pain made him look vulnerable in a way the system did not know how to use safely. Before the accident, that vulnerability had been magnetic. After the accident, it became harder to control. There were people who loved him. Elizabeth Taylor defended him more than once. Suddenly, last summer, later accounts suggest that Katharine Hepburn also defended Clift when the production became difficult. Friends tried to help. Colleagues saw the strain. But personal loyalty has limits inside a business driven by schedules, insurance, and money. After the crash, Clift's body made him a financial question. Could he remember lines? Could he finish scenes? Could he remain steady enough for the day's work? Could the production insure him? Could the money be protected if his health failed? These are cold questions, but they are the questions film companies ask. And once those questions surround an actor, the actor is no longer only an artist, he becomes a risk file. That is what changed the language around Montgomery Clift. He was still gifted. He was still capable of moments that other actors could not touch. But the system began to see the difficulty before the gift. That is how an icon becomes a problem. Not in one public announcement, in one quiet calculation after another. The tragedy is that Clift's art depended on openness. His best work came from being thin-skinned, alert, emotionally available. But the business around him punished the same sensitivity when it became inconvenient. On screen, pain made him great. Off screen, pain made him expensive. That contradiction is where the story hurts most. The post-crash years were not empty. They were uneven, strained, and often painful. But they still contained work that mattered. That is important because the legend can make it sound as if Montgomery Clift ended at the telephone pole. He did not. He kept acting. And sometimes the damaged body made the performance even harder to look away from. In The Young Lions, he appeared opposite Marlon Brando, another actor who had changed what male performance could look like. Their presence in the same film should have been a clean celebration of a new acting generation. But Clift's body carried a different story by then. His face, his posture, his timing. Everything seemed to come with extra weight. The camera could not ignore it. In Suddenly, last summer, Elizabeth Taylor again played a major role in keeping him in the picture. The production was difficult. Clift struggled. The work had to be managed around what he could and could not do. Still, Taylor's support mattered. In a world where the business increasingly saw him as unstable, her insistence helped keep him visible. That loyalty is one of the few human threads running through the wreckage of his later career. Then came The Misfits. It brought together 3 stars carrying their own burdens: Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, and Montgomery Clift. The film did not give the public an easy entertainment. It was tired, strange, exposed, and full of people who seemed to know too much about disappointment. Clift's scene in the phone booth, speaking to his mother, remains one of the most painful pieces of late-career acting in American film. He does not need to announce damage. It is already in the pauses, in the voice, in the way the body seems to be asking for relief without saying the word. That is where Clift's late work becomes essential. The same public that wanted to compare him to his old face also received performances that could not have come from the untouched version of him. The pain changed the instrument. It did not remove the music, but it made the cost visible. Judgment at Nuremberg proved that beyond argument. His role was small, but it cut through the film. He played a man whose trauma sat close to the surface. Accounts of the performance often note that he struggled with lines and had to work through the scene in a raw, exposed way. The result earned him another Academy Award nomination. That is not a small detail. It proves that even when his body and memory were failing him, the camera still found something true in him. Producers could call him unreliable. Viewers could whisper about decline. Insurance companies could hesitate. But in the right moment, in the right close-up, Montgomery Clift could still do what made him great. He could make damage legible without explaining it. He could make a room go quiet. That is why the decline narrative is incomplete. It focuses on what he lost. It forgets what remained. The Freud production became one of the clearest examples of how Clift's personal decline turned into a business problem. He worked with John Huston, a director with a forceful personality and a very different kind of energy. Accounts of the set describe tension, difficulty, rewrites, memory problems, and growing conflict. The earlier draft tried to turn Huston into a villain with too much certainty. That is not necessary. The facts are already cold enough. Clift had health problems during the production, including cataract trouble that affected his ability to work. Universal later sued him, claiming he had not disclosed the issue before filming. Clift countersued for money he said he was still owed. That legal fight says more than a melodramatic scene ever could. It shows the exact point where an actor's health stopped being treated as private suffering and became a financial dispute. This is where the word uninsurable becomes so brutal. It is not just a business term. For an actor, it can become a locked door. If a production cannot insure you, the role can disappear before you even read for it. A studio does not have to say you are finished. It can simply decide the risk is too high. The phone gets quieter. The offers get thinner. The work moves on without you. Clift's later years were shaped by those practical questions. He was still Montgomery Clift, still a name with history, still capable of astonishing moments. But he was also, to many producers, a man surrounded by delays, health concerns, and worry. In the old studio world, a body in pain was not treated like a body in need. It was treated like a schedule problem. That is the difference between the human story and the industry story. The human story asks, what happened to him? The industry story asks, can we finish the picture? Montgomery Clift lived inside the gap between those two questions. For decades, the easy version of the story has been simple. Montgomery Clift drank too much, took too many pills, and wasted his talent. That version is not completely false, but it is not enough. It leaves out the body. It leaves out the jaw, the nerves, the surgeries, the exhaustion, the strain of working when pain had become part of ordinary life. After the crash, pain was not an idea. It was daily. It lived in the face that had to move for the camera. It lived in the muscles that no longer behaved the way they once had. It lived in the way long scenes became harder. It lived in the fatigue that followed him into work. Medication became part of that story. Alcohol became part of that story. Not because they made him glamorous, not because they made him tragic in some clean literary way, because they were tools he reached for to get through days that were becoming harder to manage. That does not make the dependency harmless. It damaged him. It made him unreliable. It affected the work. It frightened people who loved him. But if the script only says addiction, it misses the pain that made the dependency more complicated. A person in chronic pain can make choices that look reckless from the outside. A film set does not always care why. It only sees whether the actor can stand, speak, remember, and finish. The public saw the slowed speech, the tired eyes, the changes in posture, the rougher face, the stories of drinking, the rumors of pills. What the public often did not see was a man trying to keep acting with a body that had stopped cooperating with the old image. That is the cruelty of the decline label. It sounds like a moral verdict. It turns physical struggle into character failure. It makes the audience feel safe. They can say he fell apart. They can say he could not control himself. They can say he threw it away. They do not have to ask what it means to be a desirable male icon when your face, your body, your privacy, and your work are all being watched for signs of damage. Clift was not innocent of every choice. He was difficult. He could be unreliable. He made choices that harmed him and worried people around him. But he was also working inside a machine that had little language for care. The system could market his sensitivity before the crash. It could market the mystery of the crash after it. What it could not do was protect the man living through the aftermath. That is why the story still cuts. Not because he was perfect, because he was not allowed to be visibly broken without becoming a product. In the final years, Clift moved further from the early image that had made him famous. Between the early 60s and his final film work, he appeared less often. Projects fell away. Some roles never happened. The promise of another major collaboration with Elizabeth Taylor remained in the air, especially around Reflections in a Golden Eye, but he did not live to make it. The role eventually went to Marlon Brando. His final completed film was The Defector. It did not restore him to the center of American cinema. It did not give the public a grand final bow. It was work. That is what he still had: a set, a script, a camera. The discipline of showing up even when the larger industry had already begun to speak of him in the past tense. By then, the old face was no longer the main issue. The issue was survival under the weight of memory. For the public, Montgomery Clift remained frozen somewhere between A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. Young, tense, beautiful, unreadable. But the man in the 60s was no longer that image. He had lived through too much. His body had paid too much. The industry kept the young face alive on screen while the real man moved through rooms carrying the cost. On the final night of his life, the story became painfully small. No studio, no set, no red carpet, no cameras. Just his townhouse in New York, his companion Lorenzo James nearby, and a television schedule offering the misfits. According to later accounts, James asked if he wanted to watch it. Clift answered, "Absolutely not." That line is easy to overinterpret, and the script should not force too much into it. But it is hard not to feel the weight. The Misfits was tied to a period of strain. It carried the ghosts of Gable, Monroe, and Clift himself. It showed a version of him the public would continue to study. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he did not want to look back. Maybe he simply did not want to watch himself. Whatever the reason, the refusal feels like a final boundary. One last no to the image. By morning, Lorenzo James found him unresponsive. A doctor was called. Montgomery Clift was pronounced dead of a heart attack. He was 45. The plain fact is heavier. A man who had once been one of the most beautiful and gifted actors in Hollywood was gone in a quiet room, with no grand cinematic ending. The machine did not stop. Films kept moving. Posters kept selling. The young Clift remained on screen, preserved in light, while the man who carried the damage disappeared from the world. That is not a neat tragedy. It is a business model that often hides the human cost behind glamour. The public got one thing badly wrong about Montgomery Clift. It treated the crash as the whole story. Before the crash, beautiful. After the crash, broken. That version is easy to remember because it has a clean shape. It gives the audience a single moment to blame. A car hit a pole, a face changed, and a life went down. But lives rarely break that cleanly. The crash changed his face. It changed his body. It deepened pain and helped build the before and after myth. But the pressure was already there. The private life that could not be spoken plainly. The public masculinity that had to remain desirable. The fan magazines trying to explain him. The studio world that admired his vulnerability only when it could still sell it. The fear of becoming too difficult, too visible, too exposed. The accident exposed a fracture that had been forming for years. That is why the story matters. Montgomery Clift represents a kind of male star. Hollywood did not know how to hold. He was not the simple strong man. He was not the easy romantic fantasy. He was not the obedient studio product. He was thin-skinned, serious, gifted, private, and difficult. His body and his acting both carried tension. Before the crash, that tension made him modern. After the crash, it made him dangerous to the business. What people called decline was partly real. His health worsened. His dependency worsened. His work became more uneven. But decline is too small a word when it leaves out the system around him. It leaves out the way public curiosity fed on his changed face. It leaves out the way producers treated pain as risk. It leaves out the way an actor's private identity had to be managed in an era that punished difference. It leaves out the simple cruelty of expecting a wounded person to keep selling desire. Clift's legacy is not only that he suffered. That would be too narrow. His legacy is that he changed what suffering could look like on screen. He made male vulnerability central to American acting. He helped open the door for later performers who did not want to play strength as a clean surface. You can see the line running through Brando, Dean, Newman, Pacino, De Niro, and beyond. Not because they copied him exactly, because Clift helped prove that a man on screen could be tense, uncertain, exposed, and still command the frame. The industry had little patience for that kind of man once his pain became difficult to sell. But the camera still knew what to do with his face. That is why Montgomery Clift still matters. Not because of the crash alone, not because of the pills, not because of the rumors, not because of the sad final years. He matters because his best work still feels alive, while the image machine that tried to define him looks colder with time. Hollywood sold the beautiful face. The public remembered the damaged one. But the real story sits between them. A gifted actor forced to keep working inside a fantasy that had no room for the cost of being human. More than half a century has passed since Montgomery Clift's final night, and the easy story still survives. People still say the crash ruined him. They still talk about the face. They still repeat the decline as if it explains everything. But the face was only the most visible wound. The deeper story is about what Hollywood does when the body underneath the image starts telling the truth. Clift did not lose his talent at the crash site. He carried it with him into the later films. You can still see it in Judgment at Nuremberg. You can still hear it in the phone booth scene in The Misfits. You can still feel it in the way he made silence look dangerous. What changed was the industry's ability to explain him cleanly. The old fantasy no longer fit the man standing in front of the camera. Hollywood prefers images it can control. Montgomery Clift became harder to control because the cost was visible. He gave it something harder. A face that had changed, a body that hurt, a private life that did not fit the easy script, and a talent that refused to vanish just because the product had become more complicated. This is not the story of a star who simply fell apart. It is the story of a system that loved his sensitivity until it became real. It loved his pain until the pain stopped looking noble. It loved his face until the face no longer matched the poster. And that is the question Montgomery Clift leaves behind. When Hollywood sells a human being as an image, what happens when the human being can no longer carry the image without breaking? The answer is still uncomfortable. The image stays young. The posters stay clean. The movies keep playing, even after the person behind them has been used up. Do not just watch The Legend of Montgomery Clift as a story about a crash. Watch it as a warning about what happens when a star is asked to remain desirable after pain has already changed the body. Watch the close-ups. Watch the silence. Watch the industry around him. Because the real story was never only the broken face. It was the system that could not bear to look at the man who survived it. This is Hollywood Dark Secrets, where we do not treat old Hollywood scandals as gossip. We look at the system behind the image, the people it protected, and the people it left behind. If you want more stories like Montgomery Clift's, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell us which Hollywood legend you want us to examine next. Because behind every beautiful image, there is always a part of the story they hoped the public would stop asking about.